The morning sun had barely crept over the rooftops of Queens when 7-year-old Leo Reyes learned what it meant to count pennies, like they were drops of water in a desert. He sat cross-legged on the worn carpet of their studio apartment, the kind of place where the radiator clanked like a dying engine, and the walls were thin enough to hear Mrs. Kowalski's television game shows 3 doors down. In front of him lay a mason jar, its glass clouded with age, filled with coins his mother had been saving for what she called the rainy day fund. Today, Leo decided, qualified as a monsoon. He dumped the contents onto the carpet, separating quarters from dimes, dimes from nickels, nickels from the stubborn pennies that always seemed to multiply. His small fingers moved with practiced efficiency, stacking them into neat towers. $47.63. Not enough for the prescription Dr. Huang said his mother needed. Not even close. From the bedroom, the sound of coughing cut through the early morning quiet. Not the polite, clearing your throat kind of cough. This was something else entirely. A wet, rattling sound that seemed to come from somewhere deep and broken. Leo had learned to categorize his mother's coughs over the past 6 months. The morning cough. The after-dinner cough. The middle-of-the-night cough that woke him from dreams where she was healthy and laughing, and they lived in a house with a backyard and a dog named Captain. This was the worst kind. The trying not to scare Leo cough, which meant she was pressing her face into her pillow to muffle the sound, which meant it was bad, which meant the $47.63 might as well have been 47 cents. Leo stood and walked to the small kitchenette, pulling a chipped mug from the cabinet. He filled it with water from the tap, letting it run for exactly 10 seconds first, the way his mother taught him, to flush out whatever invisible bad things lived in old pipes, and carried it carefully to the bedroom door. He knocked twice, their signal. "Come in, baby." Audrey Reyes sat propped against 2 pillows, her dark hair spread across the fabric like spilled ink. She'd been beautiful once. Leo knew from the photographs she kept in a shoebox under her bed. Not that she wasn't beautiful now, but it was a different kind of beautiful. The kind that came from fighting something you couldn't see, from smiling when smiling cost you everything. "I brought you water," Leo said, setting the mug on the nightstand. "My little hero." She reached out and brushed his hair from his forehead. Her hand was warm, too warm, and Leo filed this information away with all the other things he noticed but didn't say. "Did you sleep okay?" "Yes." A lie. He'd been awake since 4 a.m., listening to her breathe, counting the seconds between each inhale to make sure they kept coming. "Liar." She smiled, and for a moment, the illness seemed to retreat. "You get that from me, you know. I was never a good liar either." Leo climbed onto the bed beside her, careful not to jostle the mattress. The springs creaked anyway. Everything in this apartment creaked. The floors, the doors, the window frames when the wind blew too hard. It was like living inside an old man's bones. "Mom," he said, studying the ceiling where a water stain had formed the shape of a rabbit. Or maybe a cloud. Or maybe just a water stain. "Why don't I have a dad?" The question hung in the air between them. Leo had asked it before, of course. Kids at school asked about their fathers all the time, and he'd learned to say, "He's not around," with the kind of casual shrug that discouraged follow-up questions. But he'd never asked like this. Never with the mason jar counting fresh in his mind, never with the sound of her coughing still echoing in his ears. Audrey was quiet for a long moment. Then she turned her head to look at her son, really look at him, and Leo saw something flicker across her face. It might have been pain. It might have been memory. It might have been the ghost of a love she'd buried so deep she'd almost forgotten where. "You have a father," she said finally. "Everyone has a father." "But where is he?" "He's—" She paused, choosing her words like someone picking their way across broken glass. "He's somewhere he can't reach us, somewhere very far away." "Is he dead?" "No, baby, he's not dead." "Then why doesn't he come? Why doesn't he help?" Leo's voice cracked on the last word, and he hated himself for it. He was 7 years old. He was the man of the house. Men didn't crack. Audrey pulled him close, pressing her lips to the top of his head. She smelled like lavender soap and something medicinal, something that hadn't been there 6 months ago. "Some people," she whispered into his hair, "build walls so high they forget there's a world on the other side." Your father, he's lost behind his walls, Leo, and it's not your job to find him. It's not your job to save anyone." But even as she said it, Leo knew it was a lie. The good kind of lie. The kind mothers tell their children to protect them from truths too sharp to hold. He stayed there for a while longer, listening to her heartbeat, feeling the rise and fall of her chest. Then he kissed her cheek and slid off the bed. "I'm going to make us breakfast," he announced. "Toast? With grape jelly, and I'll cut off the crusts. My favorite." Leo walked to the doorway, then stopped. He turned back to his mother, and something in his face must have changed because she sat up straighter against her pillows. "What is it, baby?" "Nothing." He managed to smile. "I just love you. I love you too, more than all the stars. More than all the stars and all the fish in the ocean. More than all the stars and all the fish in the ocean and all the grains of sand on every beach in the world." It was their ritual, their prayer, their promise. Leo left to make toast, and Audrey closed her eyes, and neither of them knew that in 12 hours, everything would be different. Neither of them knew that the walls were about to come down. 47 blocks south and a universe away, the elevator doors opened onto the 88th floor of Sterling Tower. Nathaniel Sterling, Nate, to the handful of people who'd known him before the zeros multiplied on his net worth, stepped out into the executive suite with the purposeful stride of a man who'd spent 15 years turning motion into money. He was 34 years old, wore a Brioni suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and hadn't felt a genuine emotion in so long he'd forgotten what the word meant. "Good morning, Mr. Sterling." His executive assistant, Marcus Chen, fell into step beside him, tablet already glowing with the day's agenda. "The Nexus Pharmaceuticals team is set up in Conference Room A, video call with the Singapore office at 10:30. Lunch with Senator Morrison at the Capitol Grill, and your mother wants to remind you about the charity gala tonight." "Which charity?" "Children's Cancer Research." "Ironic." Nate didn't elaborate. He never did. Words were currency, and he'd learned long ago not to spend them carelessly. They passed through the executive floor, all glass and chrome, and the hushed efficiency of people paid very well to be very quiet, until they reached the corner office. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Manhattan, the city spread out below like a circuit board of ambition and desperation. On clear days, you could see all the way to the Statue of Liberty. Today was not a clear day. Today, fog clung to the buildings like gauze on a wound. "Also," Marcus added, his voice carefully neutral, "Mrs. Sterling is in your office." Nate's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Which one?" "Your mother." Of course. Victoria Sterling didn't wait in lobbies or schedule appointments. Victoria Sterling appeared when and where she pleased, like weather, like consequence. He pushed open the door to find her standing at his window, silhouetted against the gray sky. At 62, Victoria was the kind of beautiful that came from excellent genes and better surgeons. Her silver blonde hair was pulled back in a chignon that probably cost $300 to maintain. Her Chanel suit was dove gray, almost matching the fog. She didn't turn when he entered. "Nathaniel?" "Mother?" "You're late. I'm exactly on time. You're early." She turned then, and Nate saw what 15 years of watching his mother had taught him to look for. The slight tightening around her eyes, the almost invisible twitch at the corner of her mouth. Something was wrong. Or rather, something was about to be made wrong if he didn't do exactly what she wanted. "The Nexus deal," she said, crossing to his desk and picking up the quarterly projections someone had left there. "I've been speaking with the board. There are concerns. There are always concerns. These are substantive." She set down the papers. "The FDA is asking questions about the nano-region trials. Questions that require answers we may not want to give." Nate moved to his desk, settling into his chair with the easy confidence of a man on familiar ground. "The science is sound. The science is irrelevant. What matters is the perception. And right now, the perception is that Sterling Industries is pushing forward with human trials before we've adequately addressed the safety protocols. Because we have. Every protocol has been. I'm not interested in what's true." Victoria's voice cut like a scalpel. "I'm interested in what people believe, and people believe what they're told to believe. We need to control the narrative, Nathaniel, the way we've always controlled it." There it was, the royal we that really meant I. The reminder, never quite stated but always present, that Sterling Industries belonged to Victoria Sterling first and everyone else second. Nate was CEO in name and function, but the throne had always belonged to his mother. He leaned back in his chair, studying her. What exactly are you proposing? The charity gala tonight. Senator Morrison will be there. So will half the FDA advisory board. I want you to announce a voluntary delay in the nanoregion trials. 6 months. A commitment to safety and transparency. A delay will cost us our market advantage. Regenerix is breathing down our necks. A scandal will cost us everything. Victoria moved to stand in front of his desk, her palms flat on the surface. The posture she adopted when she wanted him to feel like a child being lectured. I didn't build this company from nothing to watch you burn it down with your impatience. Nate said nothing. There was nothing to say. They both knew she hadn't built this company from nothing. His father had, back when Sterling Industries was a small biotech firm operating out of a warehouse in Newark. Victoria had simply outlived him, outlasted him, and remade the company in her own image, the same way she'd remade Nate. Fine, he said. 6 months. But I want it on record that this is your decision. Everything is my decision, darling. She smiled, the expression never quite reaching her eyes. That's what mothers are for. She left without saying goodbye. She never did. Victoria Sterling didn't believe in farewells, only in making sure people remembered she'd been there. Nate sat alone in his office for a long moment, staring at the fog. Then he pulled up the nanoregion files on his computer and began to work, losing himself in the numbers the way he always did. Numbers didn't lie. Numbers didn't manipulate. Numbers were clean and pure and utterly, mercifully inhuman. He didn't notice when Marcus returned with his coffee. He didn't hear the announcement over the building's PA system about a maintenance check on the 40th floor. He certainly didn't sense, couldn't possibly have known, that a 7-year-old boy was at that moment standing on a Queens subway platform, clutching a faded photograph and a crumpled piece of paper, with an address written in his mother's shaking hand. Some walls are built to last forever. Some are destined to fall. The A train rattled through the tunnel like a mechanical dragon, all screaming brakes and flickering lights, and the particular smell of the New York subway. Oil and sweat and 1,000 stories pressed together in metal tubes beneath the earth. Leo stood near the doors, one hand wrapped around the pole, the other clutching his backpack strap. He'd never ridden the subway alone before. His mother had always been there, holding his hand through the turnstile, lifting him up to see the map, pointing out their stop so he wouldn't be scared. Today, he was scared anyway. But scared was okay. Scared meant you were doing something that mattered. The train emerged from the tunnel, and Manhattan rose around him like a forest of glass and steel. He'd seen it before, of course, from a distance, from the windows of buses that took them to free clinics on the Upper West Side, from the top of the apartment building where Mrs. Kowalski sometimes let him watch the sunset. But he'd never been inside it, never felt the way the buildings seemed to lean in. Curious, as if examining a specimen under a microscope, he pulled out the photograph for the 100th time. It was Polaroid, old and soft at the edges, the colors faded to a kind of golden sepia. 2 people stood in front of a lighthouse, the ocean churning behind them. The woman was his mother, younger, healthier, laughing at something the camera couldn't capture. Her hair was longer than, whipping in the wind, and she wore a sundress the color of sunflowers. The man had his arm around her waist. He was young too, maybe 20, with dark hair and eyes that Leo knew better than his own reflection. Not because he'd seen this man before, because those eyes looked back at him every morning from the bathroom mirror. On the back of the photograph, in his mother's handwriting, the careful letters she used for important things, not the rushed scrawl of grocery lists and appointment reminders, were 2 lines: "Where love begins." N. Sterling, Ethelgard Tower, Manhattan. Leo hadn't known what Ethelgard meant until he'd looked it up at the library. It was an Old English word. It meant noble protection or guardian of the home. He thought that was funny. If his father was such a noble protector, why had Leo never met him? Why had his mother cried when she thought he was asleep? Why did they count pennies while other kids had birthday parties at Chuck E. Cheese? The train pulled into Fulton Street. Leo checked the map he'd memorized. One more stop to Cortlandt Street, then walk north 4 blocks. He'd planned this. He'd looked up the address on the computers at the library, zoomed in on the satellite view until he could see the exact entrance, the exact street corner where he'd need to turn. Planning was important. Planning was how you beat the bad guys in the stories his mother read him. The heroes always had a plan. What Leo hadn't planned for was how tall everything would be up close, how the crowds would swallow him like a tide, how the noise would press against his ears. Car horns, jackhammers, 100 conversations in a dozen languages. The persistent background hum of a city that never slept and never stopped moving. He emerged from the subway station and immediately felt lost, even though he knew exactly where he was going. The buildings loomed over him, blocking out the sun. Business people in dark suits rushed past without seeing him, their faces fixed on phones and watches, and destinations that didn't include a 7-year-old boy in worn sneakers and a jacket 2 sizes too big. 4 blocks. That's all it was. 4 blocks to the place where his father lived his life without them. 4 blocks to the man who smiled in that photograph with his arm around Leo's mother, like he would never let go. Leo started walking. Athelgard Tower rose 92 stories into the Manhattan sky, a monolith of black glass and steel that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The building had been designed by a Swedish architect whose name Leo couldn't pronounce, built by a construction company that employed 3,000 people, and was home to the headquarters of Sterling Industries, a biotech conglomerate worth, according to the article Leo had found, approximately $47 billion. 47 billion. Leo had tried to imagine it. 47 billion pennies in a mason jar. The jar would have to be bigger than their apartment, bigger than their building, bigger than Queens. The lobby was visible through floor-to-ceiling windows, and Leo pressed his nose to the glass to get a better look. Inside, everything was white marble and chrome, the kind of clean that seemed almost aggressive. Security guards stood at regular intervals, their dark suits making them look like chess pieces. A reception desk stretched across the far wall, staffed by people who smiled with their mouths but not their eyes. Leo counted 3 security checkpoints between the front door and the elevator bank. Turnstiles with glowing green panels, guards with earpieces, a desk where visitors showed ID and signed their names in a book. He wasn't getting in that way. He knew that much. So he watched. He watched for 15 minutes, his back against the wall of the building across the street, looking like just another kid waiting for his parents. He watched the security guards change positions every 10 minutes. He watched the delivery entrance on the side of the building, where a constant stream of vans and trucks disgorged boxes and equipment. He watched the service workers in their gray uniforms, the way they flashed badges at a different scanner, the way the side door opened for them without the gauntlet of the main lobby. And he watched the catering truck. It was white, with the words Manhattan Premier Events written in gold script on the side. 2 workers were unloading rolling carts covered in white tablecloths, each cart carrying trays of food covered in plastic wrap. They moved quickly, efficiently, chatting with each other about overtime pay and a football game from the night before. Leo did the math in his head. The carts were tall enough to hide under if you crouched. The tablecloths hung to the floor. The workers were distracted, focused on getting done quickly so they could move on to the next job. It was stupid. It was reckless. It was exactly the kind of thing his mother would ground him for if she knew. But she was dying, and his father was in that building. And Leo was 7 years old, with $47.63 to his name, and no other plan. He moved. The service elevator smelled like industrial cleaner and garlic. Leo stayed perfectly still under the tablecloth. His body pressed into the smallest possible shape, his breathing slow and deliberate. The cart was moving. He could feel the vibration of the wheels, hear the ding of the elevator passing floors. And every few seconds, one of the catering workers would bump the cart's handle, and Leo's heart would stop completely. 20 floors. 30. 40. The workers were complaining about their supervisor, a woman named Denise, who apparently scheduled too many events and didn't tip out the staff fairly. Leo memorized their voices, their names, Tony and Marcus, two men who sounded tired and overworked and had no idea they were smuggling a 7-year-old through one of the most secure buildings in Manhattan. 50 floors, 60, 70. The elevator stopped. The doors opened. Floor 88, Tony said. Executive conference room. Let's get this done quick. I got another pickup at 3. Floor 88. That's where the article said the CEO's office was. That's where Leo's father spent his days moving numbers around on screens, making decisions that affected thousands of people, living a life that had no room for a dying woman in Queens or the son she'd raised alone. The cart rolled forward. Leo could hear voices now, many voices, the kind of hushed but important tone that adults used when they were pretending to be calm but were actually stressed. He caught fragments. Trial timeline. FDA concerns. Senator Morrison's position. Then the cart stopped, and Leo heard Tony say, "Service entrance to Conference A. We good to set up?" A new voice, female, clipped and efficient. "Fine, but stay out of the sightlines. Mr. Sterling is presenting in 10 minutes. Mr. Sterling, his father. 10 minutes. Leo's heart was pounding so loud he was sure everyone could hear it. He needed to wait. He needed to be patient. He needed to... The tablecloth lifted. A face appeared. One of the catering workers, Tony, holding a tray of glasses. He froze. Leo froze. For a single eternal second, they stared at each other. Then Tony screamed. The chaos that followed happened in fragments, the way traumatic moments always do. Tony dropping the tray, glass shattering against marble. Someone yelling for security. Hands reaching for Leo as he scrambled out from under the cart, his backpack catching on the wheel, tearing free with a sound like ripping fabric. Running. Not knowing where, just moving, because moving was better than being caught. And door. He pushed through it, and suddenly he was somewhere else entirely. The room was massive, all glass walls and a table that stretched for what seemed like miles. Around the table sat a dozen people in expensive suits, their faces frozen in expressions ranging from shock to outrage. Screens on the walls displayed charts and graphs that meant nothing to Leo. At the front of the room, standing before a presentation about something called Nano Region Phase 3 Results, was a man in a dark suit. Leo knew him immediately, the man from the photograph. Older now, his face harder, the easy smile replaced by something cold and calculating, but the eyes were the same, the cheekbones, the way his hands moved when he was processing information. Everything went silent. The kind of silence that happens when reality breaks and no one knows how to fix it. A woman near the door, blonde, sharp-featured, radiating fury, recovered first. "Security," she snapped. "Get this urchin out of here immediately." Guards appeared behind Leo, hands reaching for his arms, but before they could touch him, a voice cut through the chaos. "Wait." It was the man at the front of the room, Nate Sterling, Leo's father. He was staring at Leo the way you'd stare at a puzzle with missing pieces, a problem that didn't fit into his carefully organized world. He held up one hand, and the security guards stopped. The silence stretched. "Well," Nate said, his voice carrying a tone of bemused condescension, "this is unexpected." He walked slowly around the conference table, each step measured and deliberate, until he stood directly in front of Leo. Up close, he was taller than Leo had imagined, and his eyes, those amber eyes that Leo saw in his own mirror, held no warmth at all. "Who exactly are you, and how exactly did you get into my building?" Leo swallowed hard. His throat was dry, his legs were shaking, and his brain seemed to have forgotten how words worked. But he had come too far to fail now. He had counted too many pennies, heard too many coughs, told too many lies about being okay. "My name is Leo Reais," he said, and his voice didn't shake at all. "I came from Queens. My mom is Audrey Reais. She's dying, and she said you're my father." The words landed like stones in water, creating ripples of reaction around the room. Gasps. Murmurs. The blonde woman making a sound like she'd swallowed something sour. Nate's expression didn't change. He studied Leo for a long moment, then a smile spread across his face, but it was the wrong kind of smile, the kind that Leo had learned to recognize on bullies and mean teachers and adults who thought kids were stupid. "Ah," Nate said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I see. This is what passes for charity fraud these days, training children to infiltrate corporate offices with sob stories. He turned to the blonde woman. Victoria, make a note. Our building security clearly needs a comprehensive review. Victoria, the way he said it, the way she nodded, told Leo this was someone important, someone who mattered to Nate Sterling. I'm not lying, Leo said. She really is dying. She has something wrong with her lungs, and the doctors say she needs medicine we can't afford, and she wouldn't ask you for help, but she's getting worse every day, and I didn't know what else to do. A few people around the table shifted uncomfortably. Leo saw something flicker across one man's face. Guilt, maybe, or pity. Nate crouched down so he was at Leo's eye level, and for just a second, Leo thought maybe he was going to really listen. Maybe the man in the photograph was still in there somewhere, behind the cold eyes and the expensive suit. Let me be very clear, Nate said, his voice soft but sharp as a blade. My memory is excellent. It's what made me a billionaire. I remember every investment I've made, every deal I've closed, every person who's tried to take advantage of me. He leaned closer. And I have never, not once, been involved with a woman poor enough to live in Queens and desperate enough to send a child to do her begging. The words hit Leo like a physical blow. He felt tears burning behind his eyes but refused to let them fall. He wasn't a beggar. His mother wasn't desperate. They were people, real people who deserved to be seen. The performance is impressive, Nate continued, standing up. Really, the casting is perfect. You do have a certain resemblance, but I don't respond to emotional manipulation. Take him downstairs, document this for legal, and make sure he doesn't get within 100 feet of this building again. The guards moved forward. Leo felt hands on his shoulders, pulling him backward toward the door. And that's when he remembered the photograph. Wait, he twisted free of the guard's grip, reaching into his backpack. The movement made the security team tense, but Leo was too fast, too small, too determined. His fingers found the worn edges of the Polaroid, and he yanked it out and threw it onto the conference table with all the force his small arm could muster. The photograph spun across the polished wood, rotating slowly, catching the light from the floor-to-ceiling windows. It slid past coffee cups and tablets and the carefully arranged papers of people who had never counted pennies in their lives. It came to rest directly in front of Nate Sterling. Look at it, Leo said. Please, just look. The room held its breath. Nate glanced down at the photograph with an expression of mild irritation, the look of a man being asked to examine something beneath his notice. But then his eyes focused. His face changed. It was subtle at first. A tightening around the jaw, a slight widening of the eyes, the color draining from his cheeks like water from a sink. His hand moved toward the photograph, then stopped, then moved again, trembling slightly, and Nate Sterling's hands never trembled, and picked up the image. Leo watched as his father saw himself 20 years younger, standing in front of a lighthouse with his arm around a woman who was laughing at the wind. He watched as Nate's eyes moved to the small detail that Leo hadn't understood until now, a tattoo on the young man's wrist, a series of numbers that meant nothing to Leo but clearly meant everything to Nate. Where did you get this? Nate's voice had changed completely. The cold arrogance was gone, replaced by something raw and dangerous. Who gave this to you? My mom, Leo said. She kept it in a box under her bed. She said it was her treasure. Nate looked up from the photograph. His eyes found Leo's, and Leo saw recognition. Not the kind of recognition you get when you meet someone you know. The kind you get when you look in a mirror and finally see yourself clearly for the first time. Everyone out. Nate's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried more authority than all his previous commands combined. This meeting is over. Everyone out, now. Nathaniel, Victoria's voice was sharp with warning. The deal? I said out. Chairs scraped, voices protested. Someone mentioned billions of dollars in contractual obligations. But Nate Sterling had already stopped listening. He was staring at the photograph in his hands as if it contained the answer to a question he'd spent 7 years trying to forget. One by one, the people in the room filed out, casting confused and worried glances backward. Victoria was the last to leave, and the look she gave Leo as she passed was cold enough to freeze blood. The door clicked shut. Father and son were alone. The silence in the conference room was different from the silence before. This one had weight to it, like fog. Nate hadn't moved from where he stood, the photograph still gripped in his hands. Leo stayed by the door, his heart pounding, unsure whether to run or stay or speak or be quiet. Every possible next moment seemed equally impossible. Finally, Nate spoke. The tattoo. His voice was hoarse. It was coordinates, GPS coordinates, 41.0534 Grien, 71.962 Greases W. Do you know what that is? Leo shook his head. It's the location of the Montauk Lighthouse, the exact spot where I stood when I... He stopped, swallowed. I had it removed, laser treatment, 7 years ago. There's no scar, no record, no one knows that tattoo ever existed, except... He looked at Leo. Except the person who was with me when I got it. My mom, Audrey. The name came out like something he'd kept locked in a box for years, finally escaping. Her name was Audrey? Her name is Audrey. She's still alive. Leo paused. For now. Nate set the photograph down carefully, as if it might shatter. He walked to the window, his back to Leo, and stood looking out at the city below. When he spoke again, his voice was strange. Smaller somehow, less certain. I thought she left. 7 years ago I came home from a trip and she was gone. No note, no message, no explanation. Just gone. He pressed his palm flat against the glass. My mother told me she'd taken money. A settlement, she called it. Said Audrey had come to her asking for payment to disappear, and my mother had obliged. She showed me the agreement, showed me Audrey's signature, showed me the bank transfer, $100,000. Leo felt something cold crawl down his spine. My mom doesn't have any money. We live in a studio apartment. She can't even pay for her medicine. Nate turned. His eyes were wet, though no tears had fallen. I know. Then why did you believe it? Why didn't you look for her? Because I was 23 years old. The words came out rough, torn. Because I was an idiot who had just inherited a company I didn't know how to run, surrounded by people who wanted me to fail. Because my mother told me what I was afraid was true, that Audrey never loved me, that she was just another person trying to use me for my money, that the baby she was carrying wasn't even. He stopped. The silence that followed was absolute. Baby? Leo's voice was very small. Nate covered his face with his hands. When he lowered them, he looked like a different person entirely. Like someone who had been wearing a mask for so long he'd forgotten what his real face looked like. She was pregnant, he said, when she left, or when she was taken, or whatever actually happened. He laughed bitterly. God, all these years, I convinced myself it wasn't mine. That she'd been seeing someone else, that my mother was protecting me from a con artist. He looked at Leo. Really looked, the way Leo had wanted him to from the beginning. But she wasn't, was she? And you're not a scam. You're my son. The words hung in the air between them. My son. Leo had imagined this moment 1,000 times. In his imagination, he'd known exactly what to say. He'd be brave and strong and perfectly eloquent, and his father would fall to his knees and apologize and promise to make everything better. In reality, he just started crying. Mom's really sick, he sobbed. All the fear and exhaustion of the past 6 months finally breaking through. She tries to hide it, but I hear her at night and she's getting worse, and the doctors say she needs treatment, but we can't pay for it. And I didn't know what else to do. I'm 7. I'm supposed to be in 2nd grade. I'm not supposed to be counting pennies and reading medical bills and figuring out how to break into skyscrapers. He felt arms around him before he realized Nate had moved. Strong arms pulling him close, holding him the way Leo had never been held by anyone except his mother. He smelled expensive cologne and starched cotton and something else underneath, something warm and human and real. I'm sorry, Nate whispered into his hair. I'm so sorry. I didn't know, I thought. His voice broke. I'm sorry. They stood like that for a long time, the billionaire and the boy from Queens, while the fog pressed against the windows, and somewhere 47 blocks north, a woman coughed into her pillow and waited to die. The door to Nate's private office burst open, and Victoria Sterling swept in like a storm front. What in God's name do you think you're doing? Her voice was the cold, controlled fury of someone who had built her entire life on control and was watching it slip away. You just walked out of a $10 billion negotiation for a child with a sob story and a forged photograph. Do you have any idea? The photograph isn't forged. Victoria stopped mid-sentence. For just a fraction of a second, something flickered across her face. Fear? Guilt? Before the mask slammed back into place. Nathaniel, I understand you're upset, but this is clearly an elaborate scheme targeting your emotional vulnerabilities. The tattoo, Mother? Nate's voice was quiet, but it carried an edge that made Leo take a step backward. The photograph shows a tattoo I had removed 7 years ago. A tattoo no one knew about. A tattoo that was never photographed, never documented, never mentioned to a single person except the woman I was with when I got it. Victoria's smile was frozen on her face. Coincidence. Photoshop. These con artists are sophisticated. Then explain how a 7-year-old from Queens knew exactly where the tattoo was located. Explain how he knew it was coordinates. Explain how he knows details about Audrey that no one else could possibly know. Audrey. Victoria spat the name like it tasted bad. That gold-digging waitress you were infatuated with? Nathaniel, I thought we were past this. I thought you understood that woman was a threat to everything we've built. We? Nate's voice rose. We built? I built this company, Mother. I've spent 15 years turning a modest biotech firm into an industry leader. I've sacrificed everything. My health, my happiness, He looked at Leo. My family. That child is not your family. I am your family. The Sterling name is your family. Marcus. Nate spoke to his assistant, who had appeared silently in the doorway. Order a DNA test. The rapid results kit. From our genetics division. I want results within 2 hours. Marcus nodded and disappeared. Victoria's composure cracked slightly. This is insanity. You're going to subject the company to a paternity scandal based on the word of a street urchin? His name is Leo. Nate's voice was steady now, controlled. And if the test confirms what I already know, then yes, I'm going to acknowledge my son. I'm going to help his mother. And then, I'm going to find out exactly what happened 7 years ago when the woman I loved disappeared from my life. Victoria's eyes darted between Nate and Leo. For a moment, she looked like an animal caught in a trap, calculating escape routes. Then her expression smoothed back into the practiced calm she wore like armor. Fine, she said. Let's do the test, and when it proves what I've been telling you all along, we'll discuss how to handle this attempted extortion. She turned on her heel and left, her footsteps echoing off the marble floors. Leo waited until she was gone, then tugged at Nate's sleeve. She scares me, he said quietly. She looks at me like she wants me to disappear. Nate crouched down to Leo's level, and this time there was nothing cold in his eyes. She's scared, he said. People do terrible things when they're scared. But I promise you, Leo, no one is going to make you disappear. Not ever again. The genetics lab was on the 54th floor, all white walls and humming equipment, and people in white coats who moved with the precise efficiency of Swiss watches. A woman named Dr. Chen, no relation to Marcus, she assured them, took swabs from both Nate and Leo's cheeks, explaining the process in a voice clearly calibrated to be soothing. The test analyzes specific markers across 21 genetic loci, she said, her gloved hands working with practiced speed. It's 99.99% accurate for confirming paternity. Results in 2 hours. 2 hours. Leo sat in a leather chair that seemed designed to swallow him, watching his father pace the length of the waiting area. Nate had taken off his suit jacket at some point, and his sleeves were rolled up, and he looked more like a real person than he had in the conference room. Tell me about her, Nate said suddenly. Audrey, what's she like now? Leo considered the question. What was his mother like? How did you describe someone who had been your whole world for 7 years? She paints, he said finally, mostly lighthouses. There's one she's been working on for a long time, of the one in Montauk. She says it's her favorite place in the world even though we've never been there together. Nate stopped pacing. She sings when she cooks, but only when she thinks I can't hear. She's allergic to cheap ink, so she uses charcoal pencils for everything. She tells me stories about a prince who lived in a tower made of numbers, who forgot how to climb down until a painter showed him the way. Nate sat down heavily in the chair across from Leo. She's funny and smart, and she never complains even when things are really hard. She works 2 jobs, she did until she got too sick, cleaning offices at night and teaching art to kids on weekends. She says money doesn't matter as long as you have people you love. Leo looked at his hands. She never told me about you. I found the photograph by accident when I was looking for extra blankets in her closet. I wasn't supposed to see it. Why do you think she never told you? Leo thought about this for a long moment. Because she didn't want me to be sad, he said. She didn't want me to feel like I was missing something. She wanted me to think our family was complete, just the two of us. Nate was quiet. When Leo looked up, he saw that his father's eyes were wet again. She sounds exactly like the person I remember, Nate said, only stronger. The 2 hours passed slowly. Marcus brought sandwiches that neither of them ate, coffee that Nate drank and Leo wasn't allowed to have, a tablet loaded with games that Leo was too nervous to play. They sat in silence mostly, but it wasn't the uncomfortable silence of strangers. It was the silence of two people waiting for the same answer to the same question. When Dr. Chen finally returned, her face was professionally neutral. She handed Nate a tablet displaying the results, and Leo watched as his father read. The tablet fell from Nate's hands. "It's him," Nate breathed. "It's real. He's mine." Dr. Chen smiled. "Congratulations, Mr. Sterling. It appears you have a son." Leo felt the world shift beneath him. He'd known, of course. He'd always known, in the way children know things they can't prove. But there was a difference between knowing and having it confirmed, between hoping and being certain. He was Nate Sterling's son, officially, scientifically, irrefutably, and his mother was still dying in a hospital 47 blocks away. "We have to go," Leo said, grabbing Nate's arm. "Mom needs help. She's at St. Jude's Hospital, in the ward for people who can't pay. We have to go now." Nate looked at him with something like wonder. "How did you get here? How did you find me?" "The subway, and the photograph, and the library computers." "You took the subway alone? Across the city? You broke into one of the most secure buildings in Manhattan?" "I had to." Leo's voice was small but steady. "She's my mom." Nate pulled out his phone and dialed. "Marcus, I need the helicopter ready in 5 minutes, St. Jude's Hospital, Queens, and contact the medical team. I want our best pulmonary specialist standing by." He hung up and looked at Leo. "Let's go get your mother." They were halfway to the elevator when Victoria stepped out of a side corridor blocking their path. "Nathaniel," her voice was ice, "we need to talk." "Not now, Mother." "Yes, now." She moved closer, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. "I just spoke with the board. They're concerned about your behavior today. Abandoning a major negotiation, submitting to a DNA test without consulting legal. And now, what? Rushing off to play hero for some woman you haven't seen in 7 years? That woman," Nate said slowly, "is the mother of my child. A child who exists because you lied to me, because you forged documents and manufactured evidence and made me believe." His voice cracked. "You made me believe she abandoned us. You made me believe I wasn't good enough to be loved." Victoria's expression didn't change. "I did what was necessary to protect this family. You destroyed my family. I preserved the Sterling legacy." Victoria's composure finally broke, rage twisting her features into something ugly. "Do you think I spent 30 years building this company to watch you throw it away on some painter from nowhere? She wasn't one of us, Nathaniel. She never would have been one of us. The child she was carrying—" "My child," Nate said, "my son, who grew up in poverty because you stole him from me. I gave you an empire. You gave me a prison." Nate took Leo's hand. "And now I'm walking out." He pushed past Victoria, pulling Leo toward the elevator. Behind them, Victoria's voice rose to a scream. "If you do this, you lose everything. The board will never support you. I will destroy you, Nathaniel. I will burn this company to the ground before I let you humiliate the Sterling name." The elevator doors opened. Nate stepped inside with Leo. "Then burn it," he said. The doors closed on Victoria's howling fury. The helicopter cut through the gray sky over Manhattan, its rotors beating a rhythm that Leo felt in his chest. Below them, the city spread out like a circuit board, all geometric patterns and flowing traffic, and the tiny figures of people who had no idea that everything was changing. Leo pressed his face to the window, watching Queens appear on the horizon. His neighborhood looked different from up here, smaller somehow, and more fragile. The apartment buildings huddled together like they were cold. The streets that had seemed so long and complicated when you walked them were just lines on a map. "There," he said, pointing. "St. Jude's. The brick building with the cross on it." Nate spoke into his headset, directing the pilot. As they descended toward the hospital's parking lot, Leo saw something that made his stomach drop. An ambulance was parked at the emergency entrance, lights flashing, and near the side door, the door for the charity ward, where the people who couldn't pay were kept, there was a commotion. People in scrubs, security guards, a wheelchair, and in the wheelchair being pushed toward the street was a woman in a hospital gown with dark hair spread across her shoulders like spilled ink. "Mom?" Leo screamed, but the helicopter was too loud, and they were too high, and she couldn't hear him. The helicopter touched down in the parking lot, and Leo was running before the rotors had even slowed. He ran across the wet asphalt, through the rain that had started falling sometime in the last hour, past the parked cars and the ambulance and the people who tried to grab him. "Mom." Audrey looked up from her wheelchair. Her face was pale, too pale, and there were dark circles under her eyes, and she was hooked to an oxygen tank that rattled as the guards pushed her toward the street. But when she saw Leo, her face transformed. "Baby? Leo, what are you?" She started coughing, deep racking coughs that shook her whole body. Leo threw himself at the wheelchair, wrapping his arms around her, not caring about the oxygen tubes or the rain or the security guard trying to pry him away. "I found him," he sobbed into her shoulder. "I found Dad. He's here. He came. He's going to help." "What are you talking about? Leo, how did you get here? You should be at school." A shadow fell over them both. Audrey looked up, and whatever she was going to say died in her throat. Nate Sterling stood in the rain, his expensive suit soaked through, his carefully styled hair plastered to his forehead. He didn't look like a billionaire anymore. He looked like a man who had just woken from a very long nightmare. "Audrey," he said, "just that, just her name." She stared at him as if seeing a ghost. Maybe she was. "You." Her voice was barely a whisper. "After all this time, you." "I didn't know." Nate's voice broke. "Victoria told me you left. She showed me documents, told me you took money to disappear. I believed her. I was stupid and young and scared, and I believed her, and I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." The security guards had stepped back, uncertain. The medical staff was watching with expressions ranging from confusion to concern. The rain kept falling, drenching them all, and no one moved. Audrey looked at Nate for a long moment. Then she looked at Leo, who was still clinging to her wheelchair, his face buried against her arm. Then she looked back at Nate. "He has your eyes," she said softly. "I used to pretend he didn't, but he does." "I know." Nate knelt in the rain, bringing himself to her level. "And your smile, and your stubbornness, and your courage." He reached out hesitantly and touched her hand. "I thought I lost you. I thought you chose to leave, but you didn't, did you?" Audrey shook her head slowly. "Your mother came to me. She offered me money to disappear, and when I refused, she had people. Lawyers, investigators. They threatened to have me deported. My grandmother was undocumented, and they found records. They said they could prove I was 2. They said they would take the baby. They said they would destroy any chance I had of ever seeing you again." Tears were streaming down her face now, mixing with the rain. "I had nothing, Nate. No money, no power, no proof. What was I supposed to do?" "You were supposed to tell me," Nate said. "You were supposed to trust me. You were 23 years old, and you were surrounded by people who wanted to keep us apart, and I didn't know if you would choose me." Audrey's voice cracked. "I didn't know if I was worth fighting for." "You were." Nate lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "You are. You always will be." The moment hung suspended in the rain. 3 people who should have been a family, finally together after 7 years of lies and distance and the particular cruelty of people who think love is weakness. Then Audrey started coughing again, and the spell was broken. "We need to get her inside," Nate said, standing and gesturing to the medical staff who had been hovering uncertainly. "Not this hospital. My facility has better equipment. There's a helicopter waiting." "Sir, we have protocols," one of the nurses began. "I don't care about your protocols." Nate's voice had regained some of its command. "This woman is the mother of my son. She's coming with me, and she's getting the best care money can buy. And if anyone tries to stop us, they will regret it for the rest of their professional lives." No one tried to stop them. The Sterling Medical Center occupied 3 floors of Ethelgard Tower, a state-of-the-art facility usually reserved for executives and their families. Within an hour of arriving, Audrey had been examined by a team of pulmonary specialists, scanned by machines that Leo couldn't pronounce, and installed in a private room with a view of the Manhattan skyline. The diagnosis was serious but treatable. Advanced pneumonia complicated by an autoimmune condition that had gone undiagnosed for years. Without treatment, she had weeks, maybe days. With treatment, the aggressive, expensive treatment that Sterling Medical could provide, she had a fighting chance. Leo sat by her bed, holding her hand while she slept. The machines beeped softly, their rhythms steady and reassuring. Through the window, he could see the city lights coming on as dusk settled over Manhattan. Nate appeared in the doorway. "How is she?" "Sleeping." Leo didn't let go of his mother's hand. "The doctor said the treatment is working. They said she's stable." Nate walked over and stood beside Leo's chair, looking down at Audrey's face. In sleep, some of the pain had smoothed away and she looked younger, closer to the woman in the photograph. "I'm sorry," Nate said quietly, "for what my mother did, for what I believed, for the years you grew up without a father." Leo considered this for a moment. "You didn't know," he said finally. "You believed a lie. That doesn't excuse it. I should have looked for her. I should have questioned the story. I should have—" He stopped, swallowing hard. "I let money and power make me lazy. I let someone else do my thinking for me. And you both paid the price." "What happens now?" Nate pulled up a chair and sat beside Leo, their shoulders almost touching. "Now your mother gets better. Nat, that's the most important thing." He paused. "After that, I don't know. I've missed 7 years of your life. I don't even know your favorite color or what grade you're in, or whether you like baseball or basketball or neither." "Blue?" Leo said. "Second. Neither. I like soccer." Something softened in Nate's face. "Soccer? Good, that's a start." He reached out hesitantly and put his hand on Leo's shoulder. "I know I can't make up for lost time, but if you'll let me, I'd like to try." Leo looked at his father. Really looked, the way he'd been looking all day. He saw the expensive suit and the tired eyes and the hands that were calloused in places. Rich people's hands weren't usually calloused. He saw someone who had been lost and was trying to find his way back. "You left your meeting," Leo said, "the big important one with all the money." "I did." "And you yelled at your mom, the scary one." "Also true. And you flew a helicopter to save us even though you didn't have to." Nate's lips twitched. "Well, technically, Marcus flew the helicopter. You know what I mean?" "I do." Nate squeezed Leo's shoulder gently. "Does that earn me a chance?" Leo thought about all the stories his mother had told him, about princes in towers made of numbers, about men who forgot how to climb down, about painters who showed them the way. "I think," he said slowly, "you have to start at the beginning. That's what Mom always says. When you're lost, you go back to where you started and begin again." "Where's the beginning?" Leo smiled, the first real smile since this whole impossible day had begun. "The lighthouse," he said. "Montauk, where love begins." 6 months later, the Montauk Lighthouse stood golden in the late afternoon sun. The small house beside it, once a maintenance building, now converted into a comfortable cottage, had fresh white paint and a wraparound porch and a studio on the second floor with north-facing windows that let in perfect painting light. Leo sat on the porch steps, watching his father try to fly a kite shaped like a rocket ship. Nate was doing badly. The kite kept nosediving, tangling in the seagrass, nearly decapitating a seagull. But he was laughing while he failed, which was something Leo had learned to appreciate over the past 6 months. His father laughed more now. He smiled with his eyes. "You're doing it wrong," Leo called out, grinning. "I'm aware. You have to run faster." "I'm running as fast as middle-aged billionaires run." From inside the house came the sound of his mother's laughter. She was healthy now. Not perfectly healthy. She would always have to be careful. But healthy enough to paint and cook and walk on the beach and do all the things she'd dreamed of during the years when dreams were all she had. The door opened, and Audrey stepped onto the porch, carrying 2 mugs of hot chocolate. She'd put on weight in a good way, filled out the sharp edges that illness had carved. Her hair was longer, her eyes brighter, and she moved with the easy grace of someone who had finally stopped running. "Your father is going to hurt himself," she said, handing Leo one of the mugs. He's determined. He's stubborn. He learned it from you." Audrey laughed again and sat down beside her son, wrapping an arm around his shoulders. Together, they watched Nate finally get the kite airborne, his whoop of triumph echoing across the beach. "Mom?" Leo asked, snuggling closer into her warmth. "Yes, baby? Are we happy now?" Audrey was quiet for a long moment. The waves crashed against the shore in the distance. The kite danced in the wind. The lighthouse threw its shadow across the grass, pointing toward the sea like a finger showing the way home. "I think," she said softly, "we're learning how to be. And sometimes that's even better than just being happy. It means we get to choose it, every day." Nate came jogging up the steps, the kite now tangled in his hair, sand all over his expensive jeans. He'd stopped wearing suits on weekends. He'd stopped checking his phone every 5 minutes. He'd stopped a lot of things, started others. There was a foundation now, in Audrey's name, funding art programs for children in poverty. There was a trust fund for Leo's education, and a new policy at Sterling Industries requiring paid sick leave for all employees, and a grandmother who was currently facing criminal charges for fraud, coercion, and conspiracy. The Sterling Empire had survived Victoria's attempt to burn it down. Barely, differently, but maybe that was the point. "I conquered the kite," Nate announced, picking a piece of seaweed out of his hair. "The kite conquered you," Leo corrected. Details. Nate sat down on Audrey's other side and she leaned into him, and he put his arm around her the way he had in the photograph all those years ago. Only now Leo was there too, fitting into the space between them like a puzzle piece that had finally found its picture. "Dad?" Leo said. The words still felt new in his mouth, but he was getting used to it. "Yeah? Thank you for coming back." Nate reached across Audrey to ruffle Leo's hair. "Thank you for finding me," he said. "Thank you for being brave enough to count the pennies and ride the subway and hide under catering carts and yell at billionaires in boardrooms." He paused. "You're braver than I ever was." "You were lost," Leo said, echoing his mother's words from that morning 6 months ago. "Some people build walls so high they forget there's a world on the other side. But you climbed over them." "I went around them, actually, through the service entrance." Nate laughed, a real laugh, warm and full and nothing like the cold sound he'd made in the conference room on the day they met. "Noted. I'll tell security to watch out for determined 7-year-olds." They sat together on the porch as the sun sank toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and the particular purple that exists only at the edges of day. The lighthouse began its nightly rotation, sweeping light across the darkening water, guiding ships safely past the rocks, bringing travelers home. Leo finished his hot chocolate and set the mug down. He was tired, the good kind of tired, the kind that comes from days spent running on beaches and flying kites and being part of a family that had almost never existed. "I think," he said, yawning, "that this is where love lives now." Audrey kissed the top of his head. Nate pulled them both closer. And somewhere in a tower made of numbers, in a city that never stopped moving, an empty office waited for a man who had finally learned that some treasures can't be counted, and some journeys end exactly where they should have begun. And that's how one brave step changed 3 lives forever. If this story touched your heart, thank you for staying until the very end. Please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a powerful story like this, every single day.